Today we're going to be tearing down this Dana 25. It most likely came from a Willys MB or CJ2A, one of the two. So we're going to be really getting into it today. There's a lot of areas that have a lot of heavy rust, especially down over here, and might add some challenges, but we'll get it apart and we'll get everything cleaned up. Let's dive in. So, like I said, we are going to start tearing this apart. Normally the first thing I like to do is get the front tie rod here torn down, just because it gets it out of the way, and then we have more access to start doing the hubs, and it makes it a little bit easier too, because when you have to take your upper arms off, your little pitman arm, kingpin arms, it makes it easier to get them all off when the tie rods are off. It holds everything in place. So we just gotta grab this cotter pin if it wants to come on out. Get that right there. And then we're gonna grab our nice socket. Boom. Got this off. Now we're gonna come down through and do the rest of them. Let's get the little guy out. Now, sometimes these will just pop right out, like that one did, which is a miracle in itself. Sometimes they don't. What you can do is you can get yourself a big hammer, give it a couple whacks, and see if it pops up. If it doesn't, you may need to actually get a pickle fork of some capacity in there, because that does not look like it's coming off. So what we need to do is we need to end up separating these. So we're going to end up using pickle fork. I have an air hammer because lazy and convenient. So that just pops right off. So once we get this side popped up and off, we can go back over here. Now this pickle fork that I have doesn't quite want to fit back on there, because it's a little bit too big for this application. So we're going to thread this back on until we get it just flush. And it should give us enough room to pop this out. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean here. So we're just flush, and we're going to bring a hammer down and hit that. Should I actually hit the tie rod itself? There, we got it to pop. So sometimes you just gotta go to brute force. There we go. Okay. Nice. Move this stuff out of the way. So yeah, basically what we had to do there was, pickle fork was too big, and I couldn't use a punch just to hit the thread or the stud, and that wasn't getting enough force, so I ended up having to hit right on the collar here and give that a couple good whaps with a big hammer, and it popped right off. Just gonna tag that so that way I know what that goes to. And we're gonna rinse and repeat over here. Now this side's gonna be a little bit more challenging because we have a difficult situation over here. This one is pretty well shot. So this is the problem that we are in, is this is not very good. The problem is we have cotter pin here, and this is all just rusted right away. I'm not super optimistic about it. I'm just trying to see if I can get the cotter pin to come out one way or the other. And it does not look like it wants to move. You know, that's fine. Okay. Now we're going to find a nice sharp chisel, and we're going to see if we can come in here and break this up. Nice. There you can see that's what's left of the nut right there. Not too much behind it. Pretty thin and worn out. Now we're in the same predicament. We're going to try and get this guy off of here without destroying the threads. And I don't necessarily want to have to, damage the threads at all. So we're going to try and hit right on the flat again. Cool. We're going to tag this one right away. So now what I'm after is I want to get this bell crank off. So in order to get this guy off right here, this is the bell crank. In order to do that, we got to take this whole nut and cotter pin off, and then get the pin that's down here off as well. First up, we got to take this cotter pin off. Just grab a pair of dikes, whatever you want, and hopefully you get lucky enough that they would pull right out. Now we're going to grab our appropriate socket. So now that that's off, we're going to slide our bell crank off. So now our nice bell crank is off. We can either take the nut and set it back on here, or we can put it wherever you want to put it. I like to screw them back on here because we're going to end up reusing it to take this off. Get our air hammer back out. So for this, you can use a regular punch if you want to. It doesn't really matter to get this out down there. You can use a punch. I have an air hammer. I'm going to see if I can drive it out with this. Let's see if I can get any movement on it. Which I can. And what I typically find is that the initial burst is what takes a lot of the force, and it's hard to get that to drive out. So I use the air hammer basically to break it free. That's our pill. And now we're ready to take this shaft out. I'm just going to flip the axle over, because it's going to make my life a little bit easier. With this axle flipped over, you can see your outer and your inner. What we're going to be doing is basically taking some kind of a punch, putting it in there, and driving this out. I'm not going to be using a punch, I'm going to be using my air hammer again, because I like it. So inside here, into our mount for the pivot pin, for the bell crank, this goes down in, and then you have a little pin that comes over. And there's a little slot in here that these make together. These get really stuck on, they're really tight, they don't want to separate. So, air hammer for the win. So we got this all done and out of the way. Now we have better access to our front differential cover, and it's a little bit easier now to take these sides off. So I'm going to go ahead and start working on the outside edge, or the outside hub I should say. We're going to pull the dust caps off, we're going to pull the flange off, there should be a nut in there, pull the drum off, pull the internals out, and get this whole side torn down. And then once this side's down, we're just going to repeat the process and put it back over on this side as well. Probably going to have some problems up here. These brake shoe or brake line shields up here are pretty corroded and rusty. We'll see what that's going to be about, but I'm not super optimistic that they're going to come off very easily either. They look pretty corroded, pretty gross. But we're going to see what we can do. I think these are right there. Okay. So again, we have that little cotter pin that we got to take off. And I'm just going to end up using a little chisel to straighten these sides out. And we're going to see if we can actually pull this out or not. Nice. We should get a socket and get that nut taken off. Good enough. Set that to the side. Now we just got to pull off these 6 bolts. Now this is an early style star pattern. If you watched our other video about the differences and identifications, this is one of those differences from the early ones versus the late ones. Same with the front differential cover. Nice. That actually looks really nice in there. Not too bad. Okay, so now what we're working with here is we have this big nut in here. Sometimes they come off, sometimes they don't. Come on. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to basically take our chisel and put a little bit of a 45 here. And what that's going to do, it's going to catch the corner, the outside edge, so to speak. Okay. Okay. So it puts these little marks in right there, if that'll focus. Not too big of a deal. They can come out. Sometimes they run these plates back in here that will also, well, I'll get it out and I'll explain it to you. Okay, this is just a flat ring. Sometimes they run a ring like this, but with tabs on it. If you watch our last video, they kind of go through that. So now it's the same thing. We have an internal nut as well in here. Sometimes they aren't as tight because they're just for tension, but if not, we'll just take and same process. Gonna flip this around. So again, we're just gonna take this nut off over here, and this is gonna free up our whole hub to be able to pull this whole drum off over here. Sometimes these drums will be seized fast to the brake shoes inside there, and when that happens, it's kind of fun, but it's a lot of banging and beating. You can either hit on your outer edge or get in behind this flange and beat the flange off that way. Either one really works. Whatever floats your boat. But hopefully this one comes off, but I doubt it. Okay. So that's all off of there. And I'm just going to put it right behind this outer flange right here. And see if I can get it to pop off. Nice. All right, I'm just gonna have to bang the snot out of this, I think. I gotta prop it up on something. Hey, now we're making some progress. Okay, there is our hub. Victory. So we'll take this over to the press and I'll show you how that works. So this is going to be pressing out the studs to separate the actual hub from the drum. So you just got to basically put it in a press. You can use a big hammer and whack down on all these studs here, or you can put it in a press. It's a little bit easier in a press. Press all the studs out and then the hub will separate from the drum. There you go. Two separate pieces. Set the hub aside, toss the drum. So we're going to take this backing plate off over here and pull these shoes off that are hanging on by a thread. Get that out of here. But we're going to go ahead and pull these things off over here. Now we can go through and pull these springs off and kind of get these shoes up and out of the way. I don't need these springs for anything. And we're gonna end up taking this all apart a little bit later. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pop these bolts off that are in here. And I will break down this whole assembly later because we take and clean them all up. But for what we're doing right now, I don't really need them. I just need to get them off of here. They just come right off. And we're gonna take and we're just gonna cut this brake line up here because we don't need that. Give that a few little taps. Boom. Comes right off. And now it's a little bit easier to work with it because we can unscrew the two big nuts back here and unscrew some of these other brake components, pull all this stuff off to have a bare backing plate. So now what we're left with is where I got this spindle assembly off of the hub. So I'm going to use a small little chisel and a little hammer, and I'm going to try to come up in behind here. Give that a little tap. Give that a little tap. It starts to spread open a little bit, and then it'll pop right off. And there is our nice spindle. We are going to go ahead and pull this axle shaft out. Okay. I want to make sure everything's lined up. This is going to come off. Nice joint. I think these things are actually called like a Zuppa joint or Zuppa. It's like R-Z-E-P-P-A or something, or Zuppa. I don't really know exactly how it's pronounced. We have that. Just gonna grab my tag for it. So that way I don't forget where it came from, what side it's from, any of that. We're gonna have to start taking apart these upper knuckles, get this brake hose, which no longer needs, go over there to our scrap pile. The problem with these is the upper portion of these look to be pretty darn corroded and rusted and problematic. I don't have a lot of hope that they're gonna come off. The bottom looks pretty messed up as well. Okay. And again, the tops are really hammered. So I'm gonna try these little fancy dancy sockets. These are just a spiral socket. I don't know if they're gonna work. These look like they're dented in a little bit. Negative on the first one. Negative on number 2. Anything left of these? Nope. Negativo. Wonder if I can come in here and chisel some of this away. Well, that works surprisingly well for this. Worked for that one at least. So that same trick that we did earlier over here, the nuts are just that far gone that there isn't really anything left to them. So I'm just trying to go through and chisel them off a little bit, and I got one off, so we'll see if we can get the other ones here. Not 100% sure, but we'll see what we can do. Oh, I guess that really really bounces that around up there, doesn't it? Didn't really think about that. This one doesn't want to give up the ghost. Okay, so that one actually worked. So now, tap these kind of guy off of here. Sometimes you can take your chisel, put back in here, help pry it up and off. Cool, that's off. So, now in theory, our kingpin pitman arm should come right up and off. Should. A couple good whaps. Clean some of the dirt. Up and all the way from there. And this one's starting to move, which is good. Just gonna give it a couple little hits there. This is where a chisel comes in. If you start seeing a little crack around there, then you're starting to separate it. Once you start seeing that, a lot of times you can get a little chisel in there to really start driving it apart. Right like that. Now it's important to note there is shims under here, sometimes, most of the time. So when you use the chisel inside there, you're going to end up destroying those shims. There might be a better method. Sometimes I've had a couple of them that they just kind of like wobble off. That's not super common, at least not in my world. Most of these things have been sitting out and they don't ever want to come out apart. So you can buy new shims. I'm not too worried about it. Take a little pry bar in here. Pry it up the rest of the way once it comes out. It gets unseated. Cool. So there you go. That's your kingpin arm. That's the little shim in here that I was talking about, which I wouldn't recommend reusing these things anyways. But if you had one that wasn't too old, this one doesn't even want to come up. Okay, shim is off with our pitman arm. Set that down there to the side. So what we're gonna do now is something slightly different. We're gonna pull these seals off the back, and we should be able to pivot this whole knuckle off without taking the lower kingpin out, because they're so rotten and they're so torn apart versus trying to lay underneath here. Sometimes I find it easier to pull them all off, and then you can work on that small piece on the bench and cut, dissect, and do more of that. So come back here, grab our wrench again, socket. Seriously. Stubby for the win. Cool. So now we have that upper portion of the seal off. Just get behind it. You have a metal retainer, and then you actually have your felt rubber. And this is going to give us a lot more movement now. But what we need to do is take the bottom off as well, so that way we can actually pivot everything off. Let's move that back there. And the last one here. Why is it always one? Okay. So obviously, if I wanted to save a lot of these worn out seals, I would be taking a little bit more time in fighting with it. But these lower bolts down here look like they're going to need to be cut around so we can save the knuckle. These back seal pieces are pieces of metal, and this rubber's all pretty well shot. But this one here is not wanting to come off either. So now I can go and actually work on the bench. But you don't need to get both kingpins off, basically, to get the knuckle off. If I were to got this back nut off, or not nut, bolt, and pull the seals off, this would just kind of fall right off a lot easier, and you pull everything else off. But it didn't, so as long as you get most of them off, you can leave one on, kind of bend it out of the way. So if this is still in a vehicle, a lot easier doing this than fighting with it. All right, we're back. We kind of cleaned up a little bit and got some of that. So we're gonna go ahead and start tearing this side down, and then we'll jump right over and get the center out and ring and pinion, all that fun stuff. This axle is gonna be done. Just like that. So now we're going to move on to taking the pinion out and the ring gear, front differential, all that stuff. Okay. Again, there's a nut in here, or a cotter pin in here. That just got to come out, but I can't even see where it's at. If I can use this small little punch. There we go. There we go. Clean all this gunk out of here. Okay, we'll see if we get lucky. Boom, right like that. Easy peasy. Okay, we're gonna take this ring and pinion out. The yoke and all that came off really easily. You just tapped it with a little hammer and it came right off. Normally they don't do that. Normally you gotta pull them to some degree, but today we got lucky. I'm not gonna complain after the rest of it took forever. What are the chances of that? First bolt up, snapped. Second bolt, snapped. Boom. Pretty nice. Pretty nice. Okay, we'll get our main caps out of the way. And now it's time to get that out. Now, what I normally do is if you can take some pry bars and pry up in here, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you can get up in behind here and kind of pry like that. It doesn't always work the best. What I really like is I like to rotate this around till we get, oh, that's rusted, isn't it? That sucks. But I like to take basically a slide hammer with 2 fingers on it and stick it on the edge. And just pull it on out. So that's your ring. Now let's get the pinion out. Normally I always start off just trying to tap it. A lot of times you can get them off like that, and it's a little bit easier than trying to smack the snot out of it. But if they have to smack the snot out, put the nut back on the top. And when you put the nut back on the top, then put your nut back on the top, hammer it out. If that doesn't work, there's a small little, if you can see that indent on the top that you can take a bigger punch, stick in there, and that helps to protect the threads if you're trying to save them. So that is a Dana 25. Pretty straightforward. There's a lot of times the older axles have problems with the nuts and things of that nature. So just take your time, and sometimes you got to get creative on how to tear little aspects of it off. See you next week.